Woe is me, I am forsaken. What are you talking about? No one's forsaken you in years. I am lonesome and bereft. To be forsaken, you'd have to have somebody around to forsake you, which also has not happened in years. I can do naught but bemoan my miserable state. You're a dragon! Stop acting like a princess in a tower and do something about it! A couple weeks ago, I was on one of my usual research quests, chasing a tiny bit of evidence down an ever-broadening rabbit hole, and found myself reading an unexpectedly hilarious passage of a medieval classic, the Roman de la Rose, a famous 13th century French text that is equal parts romance novel and instruction manual. Normally, I try to stick to pretty dresses and old hair products, but this was just too amusing not to talk about. Also, I hear there's some big holiday about romance coming up soon, so hey, algorithm, look at me! I'm being seasonal or topical or whatever it is you call it. Hi, I'm V, fashion historian prone to distraction by interesting source material, especially when it's as funny as dating advice from the Middle Ages. The last thing I expected from medieval literature was romantic advice that's still relatable several centuries after the fact. I don't know if that says more about medieval people or the state of the modern world. You tell us in the comments. So because I cannot resist a good joke at my own expense, nor an opportunity to dress up, let's read from Ye Olde Tablet and see what some 13th and 14th century books can teach us about dating. If you're just here for the pretty clothes, may I direct you to the subscribe button so you'll get your regularly scheduled next dose of fashion history sass as soon as it comes out, or the video where I made this dress. Source notes and behind the scenes snark are, as always, on my Patreon. That includes all the jokes I wrote but could not include in this video because YouTube. I'll get this unfortunate but necessary disclaimer out of the way right now. You know, the one about being a woman on the internet. I regularly poke fun at myself for not dating, and I'm about to do a whole lot of that, but I am not accepting online applications for the role of Mr. Snappy. Or paper ones, for that matter. Perhaps one day there will be a Mr. SnappyDragon, but declaring your interest in my comments or DMs guarantees it won't be you. Okay, so, the Roman de la Rose. It's a 13th century poem written in Old French by two different authors, Guillaume de Lorry and Jean de Meaux. It's presented as a dream vision where various allegorical personas instruct the protagonist, and thus the reader, in the art of courtly love. There's a ton of scholarship on it by actual legit literary historians and such, so if that's what you're after, I recommend you go look at that and not this video. What you are witnessing is not serious scholarship, it's a history nerd in a weird dress making fun of things. Regardless of whether medieval advice improves your dating life, I make no promises as to whether it will, I think anybody, medieval or modern, can appreciate a cozy bed. Birch Living sent me one of their non-toxic mattresses last summer, sent as in delivered for free to my doorstep rolled up in a box, which made my life vastly easier as someone without a car. Birch makes comfortable and environmentally conscious sleep products using organic and natural materials right here in the US, complete with a Green Guard Gold certification. The Luxe mattress I got has just about the longest list of certifications I've ever seen on a textile product. Birch works with ethical partners that adhere to strict social, environmental, and economic standards to source the variety of materials that make up these mattresses. Natural rubber, organic cotton, and wool that's hypoallergenic, mildew resistant, and fire retardant. That's the thing about learning from historical practices. You keep the bits that work, like using breathable natural fibers like wool, and not the ones that don't. You'll notice straw, while very historically accurate, is not a component of Birch's mattresses. I love traveling, and since I got this mattress last July, I have slept everywhere from planes to my uncle's house in SoCal to a 5-star hotel in Delhi, and I have to say this mattress has completely spoiled me because I prefer my own bed to all of them. I'm never gonna wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed because, well, I have fibromyalgia. But it has been, since I got this mattress, days since I pulled a muscle in my sleep. It's got really good support so I don't sink into any weird positions, but the quilted pillow top means there's no pressure on my muscles that might result in a pain flare-up later. Everyone's body is different though, so just in case it doesn't work out for you, Birch offers a 100-night sleep trial and 25-year warranty. Per my earlier disclaimer, I am not sharing with any of you, so you'll just have to get your own. I love my Birch mattress, and I think you would too. If you're looking for a new bed, check out Birch. You can click the link below or go to birchliving.com/snappydragon to get 20% off your mattress plus 2 free pillows. If you're looking for a mattress for your little ones, also check out the new Birch Kids line. Thanks to Birch for sponsoring this video and ensuring I have the comfiest bedchamber a damsel of any era could wish for. Can I put that in your dating profile? No. Wait, what dating profile? I came across this particular passage of romantic advice because I was looking at references to hair product recipes for my last video, and then got totally hooked into reading it. To set the scene, we are listening to an old woman dispensing all the advice she wishes someone had given her when she was getting into her first relationships. She tells the listener, "I was young and beautiful, foolish and wild, and had never been to a school of love where they read in the theory, but I know everything by practice. Now that I know everything about love, right up to the struggle of it, it would not be right if I were to fail to teach you." Now, where was this when I was in high school? Anyways, the old woman takes some time to explain why she knows of what she speaks, saying that she had many relationships when she was young, but because she was inexperienced and not educated in romance, none of them worked out. Now that she's older, "Even those who had loved me most, they called me a wrinkled old woman and worse before they had passed on by." The devaluation of older women and the idea that your romantic desirability has an expiration date is obviously not a new idea. In fact, I think we ought to take a look at how much that hasn't changed before we go feeling superior. I'm not saying it's no better, but it's still not great. Let's see. To whom can I complain? Oh, I have no other way to avenge myself than by teaching my doctrine. Therefore, I indoctrinate you so that when instructed, you will avenge me on those good-for-nothings. If my youth were present as yours is now, the vengeance I would take on them would not rightly be written. I like this lady. Now, I should mention, I've been told that the various allegories in the Roman de la Rose are characterized as either vices or virtues, and the old woman we're talking about is considered a vice. So my guess is that these are not views considered socially acceptable, but even so, they must not have been too unthinkable to include in this sort of poetic manual on how courtly love was supposed to work. Often some of the most useful evidence for things people were actually doing is found in sources repeatedly telling them not to do that thing. The talk of what vengeance would be taken on the various exes who mistreated and are now insulting the old woman goes on for several more lines, and I think we can all relate. Honestly, as taking revenge on your exes goes, I think teaching other people how to set good boundaries and advocate for themselves in relationships is actually a pretty good choice, but she does overshoot that mark by spending the next several paragraphs explaining that men should be played for all they're worth because they are fundamentally untrustworthy and will do the same to you. Never be generous and keep your heart in several places, not one. Don't give it, but sell it very dearly and always to the highest bidder. This is apparently necessary because young men are in no way stable, nor oftentimes are they old, and therefore they belie the oaths and faith they have given. Briefly, all men betray and deceive women, all are sensualists taking their pleasure anywhere. Therefore, we should deceive them in return. To which I say, hey, men, you're not inherently any of those things. You are just as capable of learning to be a decent, kind, empathetic, and trustworthy human and partner as anybody else. Pretending that you are innately worse at those things is not only unfair to you, but lets those men who choose not to learn those skills off the hook too easily. I understand why the old woman would give this advice, because in medieval society, she might not be wrong. It might be the best many upper-class women could do to encourage multiple courtships and eventually marry whoever made the most lucrative offer. But this does not seem like the foundation of a healthy relationship. As it turns out, living in a sexist society that commodifies romance and treats partnership like a transaction ruins things for everybody. Has anyone told this old lady about ethical non-monogamy? Since she's saying everyone should just date a whole bunch of people at once. Do you want to try explaining ethical non-monogamy to someone with medieval ideas of gender, social hierarchy, everything? Good point. Let's move on to some specifics. The section I actually found this passage because of is beauty advice, and of a frustratingly familiar kind. It is rife with unreasonable, very demeaning beauty standards, and I don't really want to repeat any of it, but it's also got fascinating tidbits of info on medieval fashion. For instance, the old woman recommends having your dressmaker lower your neckline if you want to show off how pretty your chest is. If the old woman is an allegory of vice rather than virtue, this would be considered morally dubious, but usually when we see these sorts of moral warnings, it's because people did the thing all the time. She also talks in detail about how a person could bind their chest for extra support while physically active, which is super useful evidence for how medieval people got the bust support they needed. And plenty more of the usual nonsense. If you have ugly features, you should cover them up. You should learn to laugh performatively for the male gaze. And And there's some other beauty advice that, despite this being the 13th century, is actually too spicy for me to talk about in this video. You want to see me crack jokes about the demonetization debate? Get thee to my Patreon. Next follows 3 rather lengthy and detailed paragraphs on the importance of such things as good table manners. Before sitting down, she should look around the house and let everyone understand that she herself knows how to run a house. It's fascinating as a historian to see this level of detail about medieval table manners. What's considered the polite way to serve guests, or drink wine, or put sauce on your food. But it's not just good table manners, which I think we can all agree are important. A medieval woman showing she can run a household is basically showing how good you are at your intended career. So is being a good host. Serve everyone as well as possible, carve in front of the others, and pass the bread to those around her. But there's plenty of the usual pressure to do everything as prettily as possible too. She should drink only a little at a time so she doesn't go around causing others to say she gorges or drinks too much with her mouth full. Can I please just enjoy my drink without having to think about whether I'm doing it prettily enough? Is that too much to ask? What? But I suppose there are limits. Now the old woman has moved on from telling us how to look nice for the male gaze to advocating that women sow their wild oats. A lady must not be too reluctant to play. She should seek the diversion of love as long as youth deflects her. I mean, while I wholeheartedly reject the idea that anyone is ever too old for romance, it is really amusing to see this 13th century character telling us to get out there and date as much as we can. A woman should be careful not to stay shut up too much, for while she remains in the house, she is less seen by everybody, her beauty is less well known, less desired, and in demand less. She should go off into the principal church and go visiting, to weddings, on trips, at games, feasts, and round dances. For in such places the god and goddess of love keep their schools and sing mass to their disciples. The social intent behind the advice is slightly different, but the actual literal advice still tracked several centuries later. While the Roman de la Rose talks first about developing a reputation for being an attractive, desirable person, remembered that even though this was long before the ultra-codified etiquette of the 19th century, it was still socially risky for middle and upper class women to just talk to men they didn't know. But the last line basically says it. These are the places where people meet and fall in love with each other. Therefore, you should go out to wherever your community gathers, visit your friends and family, attend their weddings, travel, find interesting pastimes, go to parties, go dancing, or whatever else. Basically, have an interesting social life, because if you stay shut up in your house, or the online equivalent, now that we have the internet, you're not gonna meet anyone new. That is rich coming from you. We are not here to discuss me. We are here to share this advice with the good people watching. Maybe you are. Do you have anything useful to contribute? Anything that isn't about me? That's what I thought. I'm going to move on from the Roman de la Rose now, since the rest of the old woman's passage is her recounting how extra terrible one of her exes was, and instead consult the #1 medieval authority on talking smack about your exes, the wife of Bath from Chaucer's 14th century Canterbury Tales. This lady has been married 5 times and will be very happy to tell you how each and every one of her husbands discovered things were just better when she was in charge. She runs a business but isn't above weaving cloth for her own dresses. In short, an icon. I think it's possible that Chaucer may have in part based her on the old woman character from the Roman de la Rose, because a lot of the advice they have is similar. I've also heard from historian Marion Turner on an episode of the Medieval Podcast that Chaucer may have based the wife of Bath on an old sex worker he knew. Either way, in the format of Canterbury Tales, she gets more time to speak her piece than literally anyone else. The setup is that a group of characters are traveling together to Canterbury and each one tells a story to the others, introducing themselves before they do so. Most of these introductions are shorter, but the wife of Bath's is something like 800 lines and includes so much fascinating social commentary. Highly recommend the podcast episode, by the way. Also, I'm quoting a Harvard translation from Middle English into slightly more modern language because it's tricky to laugh at something if the words are too old to be understood. What I love most about the wife of Bath is that she's very prepared to argue what is essentially feminist theory with the preeminent writers of the day, and Chaucer's narrative never criticizes her for doing so. Apparently there was a lot of writing in that period criticizing women for remarrying if they were widowed, despite the relative lack of other options. The classic double standard. But to me, it was told, certainly, it is not long ago, that since Christ never went but once to a wedding in the Cana of Galilee, that by that same example he taught me that I should be wedded but once. And this lady is not having it. She spends the next 100 or so lines refuting every argument. How many might she have in marriage? I never heard yet tell in my lifetime a definition of this number. She's well enough versed in scripture to argue that too. Consider here the wise King Dan Solomon. I believe he had wives more than one. But what she's really after is the hypocrisy of pretending this double standard had religious basis at all. Where can you find, in any historical period, that high God forbade marriage by express word, I pray you tell me, or where commanded he virginity? For had God commanded maidenhood, then had he damned marriage along with the act of procreation. And certainly, if there were no seed sown, then from what should virginity grow? I'll resist the urge to read out her entire speech because it's so good. The wife of Bath is basically saying, sure, being single and chaste is idealized and right for some people, but society would fail if we all did it. So have as active of a romantic life as you want, whether that's being single forever or having 5 partners, and don't ever let anyone make you feel bad about it. Are you actually listening to any of this? Did you miss all the lines about how it's perfectly fine to stay single if that's what you want? Yeah, if that's what you want. Who even let you on this show? That was rhetorical. So the wife of Bath goes on to describe her first 3 marriages, all to significantly older men. This is the part that I think most resembles the old woman's advice from the Roman de la Rose, because Auntie Bath was also not afraid to cross some ethical lines. They were very glad when I spoke to them pleasantly, for God knows it, I cruelly scolded them. Plenty of her criticisms are completely reasonable, but tell me, why hidest thou, bad luck to you, the keys of thy strongbox away from me? It is my property as well as thine, by God. What, think thou to make a fool of the lady of the house? And others are completely manipulative, such as pretending they'd insulted her while drunk, or accusing them of fancying a neighbor while neglecting her. She describes this as necessary rather than morally right or wrong. A wise wife, if she knows what is good for her, shall deceive him by swearing the bird is crazy, and prove it by taking witness of her own maid, who is in league with her. Power dynamics and the idea that one person always had to outrank another were integral to medieval society, so I can understand where she's coming from. If this is the only way you can get any autonomy or basic respect, it may seem like the best option. But once again, I do not endorse this advice. Should you find yourself in a situation where this seems like your best option, may I recommend a therapist and/or a breakup? In either order. Weirdly, the most relatable part of the wife of Bath's prologue is her 5th husband. It's not pretty, content warning for domestic violence if you do go read it. While feminist writers as such didn't really exist in Chaucer's day, misogynist ones sure did, and there were any number of texts published about how all women were sinful and untrustworthy and pick your sexist trope. The wife of Bath's 5th husband, unfortunately, stumbled into the 14th century equivalent of some red pill thread on Reddit and went right down the rabbit hole. I am not joking. That's how the literature in question reads, and I would dearly love to see some scholarship digging into that comparison. Anyways, because he was basically listening to medieval incels, the husband got controlling and jealous and tried to stop the wife of Bath doing normal things, like, seeing her friends or being in charge of her business. As the tough lady she was, the wife of Bath treated this with all the dignity it deserved and went right on doing as she liked. The result was an extremely messy argument after she tore some pages out of the husband's favorite book of sexist crap. He offered her a very victim-blamey apology. What I have done, it is thyself to blame. Forgive it me, and that I beseech thee. Given it's the 14th century and the wife of Bath doesn't have the option of throwing the whole man out, she does the next best thing. Tells her husband where he can shove his victim blaming. She refuses to let his bad behavior go no matter how long or upsetting the argument gets. Her husband agrees to let her run their household and lands, which she'd brought into the marriage, to never mistreat her again and to burn his book of misogynist nonsense. And that he said, my own true wife, do as you please the rest of all thy life. Guard thy honor and guard also my reputation. After that day, we never had an argument. Given that Auntie Bath couldn't divorce this guy, I think she sets a great example. Don't put up with men who read and believe sexist drivel. Don't let your partner control you. Definitely do not let them blame you for their mistreatment, and do not forgive anybody who doesn't deserve it. I'd just throw the whole man out as soon as he started reading that crap. Yeah, same. We can do better. Which brings us to the Wife of Bath's actual tale after 800 lines of glorious, biting social critique. It's not really dating advice, but it's very much in the same vein as everything else she has to say. Feminist before feminism, essentially. Once again, a content warning for SA, if you do go and read this, it subverts one of the biggest storytelling tropes of the era by making a point many of us will be very familiar with. Men of good looks and high status are no less, and often more, prone to mistreating women as anyone else. The story begins with an unnamed Arthurian knight, shall we say, trespassing very severely against the wishes of a young woman. Honestly, the least believable part about the Wife of Bath's tale is the next bit. The knight is immediately arrested, found guilty, and sentenced harshly. Tell me I'm wrong. The king sentences the knight to death, but the queen insists she has a better punishment. She tells the knight that he has a year and a day to go questing to become a feminist, pretty much. He has to find out what all women want, and if he fails or refuses, he'll be executed. Through various fantasy tropes, the knight learns that all women want social standing, power, and autonomy of the sort men have over women. Thanks to more weird medieval literature tropes, the knight is also forced to put this into practice and give the women in his life power over their relationships with him. Only at this point is the story allowed to end. Can this be required reading for everyone working in the modern justice system? The fact that this feels so important even centuries later is, I think, why Valentine's Day hits so poorly for a lot of us. It's hard to enjoy a holiday celebrating romantic love when we still have to deal with guys who read crap like Theophrastus. And the idea of powerful men learning about consent only seems possible through magical intervention. Just like in The Wife of Bath's tale. It's not that no progress has been made, but reading about literal medieval romantic troubles and finding them this familiar is disappointing. Honestly, though, Valentine's Day is a holiday that in its modern form exists to sell stuff. Love deserves to be celebrated, but as we see over and over in these two texts, the commodification of romance really screws everyone's chances of having a healthy relationship. So does living in a society that's full of sexism and homophobia and shame. Whether that's the outward prejudices of the Middle Ages or the modern plausible deniability masking the inequalities of today's world. Love is not about spending money on questionably ethical chocolates and pink packaging, which will probably destined for a landfill. It's not even just about romance. Friendships, family, community, all of these things are about love, whether or not you have romance in your life too. And these deserve to be celebrated. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. I hope you get to enjoy the day with your loved ones, whether they are romantic, platonic, familial, or some other kind of loved. Tell me about the most ridiculous dating advice you've ever heard in the comments, which I shall be reading with popcorn in hand. And show some love to the channel by clicking the like button and subscribing for more medieval mischief. I shall be celebrating love by deleting Tinder from my phone, because quite honestly, if there is anything that could make me consider joining a medieval nunnery, it's that app. What dating advice even exists for dragons? Have you considered infesting a coastline, breathing fire, and singing about how you're cursed until some guy comes along and smooches you repeatedly while you're a giant lizard? What? It totally worked. There's a song about it. I am never asking your advice again.